The king wants the maid. The royal raven set it from the chandelier like it was announcing bad weather, and Abigail Mercer nearly dropped a silver candle tray in front of half the Silverpine crown pack. The great hall went on breathing, because to everyone else Vesper had only croaked once. One ugly, harmless raven sound. But Abby heard every word in plain English, dry as burnt toast, and twice as rude. She kept her eyes on the wax she was supposed to scrape from the marble floor. A maid who looked up during a loyalty oath got corrected. An Omega maid who looked up at the Alpha King got remembered, and Abby had survived 24 years by being very easy to forget. At the far end of the hall, Alpha King Dorian Ashford stood beneath the glass ceiling with snow sliding down the mountains beyond him. He wore a black suit instead of a crown, because modern kings liked to pretend power was quieter when it came tailored. It wasn't. Every wolf in the room felt him. Alphas from the northern ridges stood straighter. Betas lowered their voices. Even the security team near the doors stopped touching their earpieces. Dorian lifted one hand, and the room settled like a pack waiting for the first growl. Silverpine does not bend to fear, he said. His voice was calm, low, and built to carry. We do not trade loyalty for comfort. We do not let private desire weaken public duty. Vesper fluffed his black feathers. Liar. He skipped breakfast because you smiled at the coffee cart. Abby pressed her lips together so hard they hurt. Across the hall, Lord Malcolm Greer, head of the Crown Council, watched the king with the polite expression of a man measuring where to place a knife without ever touching one. Beside him stood Lady Priscilla Wren, all pearl earrings, perfect posture, and old blood approval. The kind of woman people called suitable before they called her by name. Greer stepped forward when the oath ended. Your Majesty, the council awaits your confirmation regarding the alliance arrangement. The hall changed temperature. Not really, but every Omega instinct Abby owned told her to get smaller. Political marriages were not gossip in a werewolf court. They were border maps, patrol routes, winter food shipments, peace tied with ribbon. Dorian did not look at Priscilla. He looked, for one careless second, at Abby. It was barely a glance. A normal person would have missed it. Vesper did not. There. Again. 12 times in 23 minutes. Embarrassing. Historic, but embarrassing. Abby bent lower over the floor. Then something warm moved beneath her ribs, soft and sudden, like a thread being pulled from somewhere deep inside her chest. Dorian's jaw tightened. His hand closed once at his side. The mate bond. No, absolutely not. That kind of thing happened to noble Omegas in white gowns, not maids with wax under their fingernails. Vesper went still. For the first time all morning, his voice lost the joke. Careful, little moon bond, he whispered inside Abby's mind. The last woman who knew the king's heart died with a secret. Abby's fingers froze around the scraper. At the council table, Greer smiled. Above them, the raven turned one bright black eye toward him and said, "And that man lied at the queen's funeral." The summons came before Abby had finished scraping the wax from the floor, which felt rude, considering the wax had not committed treason. A royal guard stopped beside her with the careful face people used when speaking to low-ranking Omegas in public, polite enough to avoid witnesses, cold enough to remind her where she stood. Abigail Mercer. His Majesty requests your presence in the North Aviary. Abby looked at the candle tray in her hands. Right now? Now. Across the hall, Lord Greer watched her the way a banker watched a bad loan. Abby set the tray down slowly, because running would look guilty and fainting would be inconvenient. The guard led her through the west corridor, past glass walls showing the city far below Silverpine Mountain. Snow dusted the roofs. Traffic moved along the interstate like red and white thread, and pack patrol drones blinked over the tree line. Modern kingdom, old teeth. That was Silverpine. The North Aviary sat at the top of a narrow stone tower that smelled like cedar oil, cold iron, and feathers. Dorian Ashford stood near the windows with his hands clasped behind his back, his black suit still perfect, his expression still unreadable. Vesper perched on a brass stand beside him, looking extremely pleased with whatever trouble he had caused. "Miss Mercer," Dorian said. "Not Abigail. Not Maid. Miss Mercer. That was worse, somehow. Your Majesty." She dipped her head low enough to be respectful, not low enough to disappear. "During the oath, you reacted to my raven." Abby glanced at Vesper. He blinked one glossy black eye. "I reacted to dust." Dorian stared at her. "Dust? Old towers are emotional, your majesty. They shed. Vesper made a sound like a rusty door hinge and said directly into her mind. He likes when you lie badly. It makes him feel less alone. Abby kept her face smooth through an act of personal heroism. Dorian took one step closer. The air shifted with him. Not a command, not a threat, just the weight of an alpha king who had been obeyed for so long. Silence formed around him automatically. The strange warmth under Abby's ribs stirred again. Soft, dangerous, familiar in a way it had no right to be. Dorian stopped, as if he felt it too. For half a second, his control slipped. Not much, just enough for Abby to see the man under the title, tired around the eyes, caught between duty and something he did not want to name. Then the king returned. Vesper has rejected 3 handlers, 2 animal specialists, and 1 council-approved falconer who still refuses to discuss the incident. Smart bird, Abby said before she could stop herself. Vesper puffed up. Finally, competence. Dorian's mouth almost moved. Almost. You will tend him for 1 week. Abby looked from the raven to the king. That does not sound like a request. It is an assignment. Then I have conditions. The room went very still. Somewhere below, a door closed like the palace holding its breath. Dorian lifted one eyebrow. You have conditions. No one enters while I work. No one touches him without warning. No council observers. And if Lord Greer gets bitten, I will need that understood as a natural consequence. Vesper clicked his beak. I adore her. Dorian looked toward the window, but not before Abby caught the briefest hint of a smile. Reasonable, he said. Mostly. Abby should have felt relieved. Instead, Vesper leaned forward, his voice dropping low inside her head. Careful, little moonbond. He heard you repeat the queen's words. Now he knows you are not just a maid. Dorian turned back to her, gray eyes sharpened. Tell me, Miss Mercer, he said quietly. How do you know what my mother called him? Abby had lied to debt collectors, head housekeepers, and one very determined raccoon in the staff pantry. But lying to an alpha king, while his raven watched like a retired judge, felt ambitious even for her. Dorian's question hung in the cold tower air. How do you know what my mother called him? Abby folded her hands in front of her apron and chose the smallest truth that would not get her locked in a room with council witnesses. People repeat things in old buildings, Your Majesty. Dorian did not blink. My mother called Vesper Little Storm only when she was alone with him. Vesper tilted his head. Technically, she also called him a feathered tax audit, but grief has made the boy selective. Abby stared at a crack in the floor and prayed for strength. Maybe a servant heard it years ago. You were 14 when she died. Servants have excellent memories. That was not an answer. It was not a confession either. For one dangerous second, silence sharpened. Then Dorian did something worse than raising his voice. He softened it. Miss Mercer, if you are in danger because of something you heard, I need to know. The warmth beneath Abby's ribs pulled tight, as if some invisible thread had been hooked around her heart. Dorian's hand flexed at his side. He felt it. She knew he did. His eyes shifted, gray to silver for one breath. Wolf close to the surface, not angry, not hunting, just awake. Vesper ruffled his feathers with deep satisfaction. There it is. The bond tugged. He is pretending it was indigestion. Abby swallowed. I should get back to work. You were assigned here. Then I should start pretending this is normal. She moved to the brass stand and changed Vesper's water with hands that were steadier than her pulse deserved. Dorian stayed by the window, watching the city below like it had personally disappointed him. After a while, he said, Vesper does not tolerate most people. Maybe most people are annoying. Most people are afraid of him. Abby glanced at the raven. He was trying to steal a button from her cuff. That seems generous. He is about 10 pounds of bad manners in a funeral coat. Vesper froze, offended and delighted. Dorian looked away too quickly, but not before she saw it. The almost smile. Small. Unpracticed. Gone before it could become evidence. For the next 3 mornings, Dorian appeared during her aviary shift with excuses that became less convincing by the day. First, he came to inspect the security locks. Then the window seals. Then the emergency weather latch, which Abby pointed out was a hook. Vesper called it courtship with maintenance vocabulary. Abby tried to keep distance. She knew pack law. A royal mate bond with a maid Omega would not be treated like a love story. It would be treated like a structural threat. Every council elder would ask who placed her there, who benefited, Who could use her? And Lord Greer would smile through all of it. On the fourth morning, while Abby cleaned the lower perch, her cloth caught on a loose brass seam. Something clicked. A tiny compartment opened beneath Vesper's stand. Inside lay a silver ring, dull with age, wrapped in black thread. Dorian went completely still. Do not touch that. Too late. Abby's bare fingertip brushed the metal, and the tower seemed to drop away. A woman's voice rushed through her mind, gentle but terrified. Hide it where only the raven can guard it. If Malcolm finds proof, my son will inherit a cage instead of a crown. Abby pulled her hand back, breathing hard. On the inside of the ring, one name was engraved so finely she almost missed it. Malcolm Greer. Vesper's voice came low and cold. Now the little maid knows why the council fears her. By noon, the rumor had grown legs, teeth, and a very expensive coat. Abby heard it in the laundry corridor first, whispered over steam and folded sheets. The king had taken a maid into the North Aviary. The raven obeyed her. The king watched her too closely. By 2 o'clock, the story had reached the kitchens, where one cook claimed Abby had bewitched Vesper with moon herbs, and another said no herb on earth could make that bird behave unless it wanted to. Abby preferred the second cook. At 3, a junior steward told her she had been reassigned to polish the council chamber before the emergency session. That was how Silverpine punished people politely. It placed them in the room where powerful men discussed their future as if they were furniture. Dorian stood at the head of the black stone table when Abby entered with a cleaning cloth and a bucket she did not need. Lord Malcolm Greer sat 2 chairs to his right, silver hair smooth, hands folded, smile mild enough to be sold in church. Lady Priscilla Wren sat near the screens showing border patrol maps, her pale suit perfect, her expression trained into something soft and useless. Around them waited alphas from Ridge Packs, trade betas, security chiefs, and 2 elders old enough to remember when phones had cords and councils could ruin lives without cameras. Abby kept her eyes down. Vesper was not there, which made the room feel strangely less honest. Greer began without looking at her. The issue is not the girl herself. The issue is proximity. Abby wiped a spotless corner of the table. The girl. Proximity. Rich men loved words that made people sound like problems on a spreadsheet. Dorian's face did not move. Miss Mercer was assigned to care for a royal animal. A royal animal tied to your bloodline, Greer said. A bloodline currently under negotiation for alliance stability. Priscilla lowered her eyes with excellent timing. Abby almost admired the choreography. Greer continued. An unranked Omega with unknown influence over the Crown Raven presents a risk, especially when your majesty has delayed confirming Lady Wren as the preferred alliance candidate. Something in Dorian's scent sharpened, cedar under snow, controlled too tightly. The thread under Abby's ribs answered before she could stop it. Warmth pulled toward him. She hated that it did. She hated more that Dorian felt it, and still said nothing. One elder cleared his throat. The staff member should be transferred until the matter is reviewed. Staff member. Abby pressed the cloth flat against the table so her hands would not curl. Dorian looked at her then. Only once. His eyes held apology, warning, and something softer he had no right to show in a room full of wolves waiting to tear meaning from his bones. For the stability of Silverpine, Greer said, we recommend immediate reassignment to the Western Service Lodge. The Western Lodge was 30 miles down the mountain. Far enough to cut routine. Far enough to make a maid disappear without calling it exile. Dorian picked up the order tablet. His thumb hovered over the approval mark. Abby told herself she understood. A king had borders, treaties, patrols, food stores, winter roads, thousands of people standing on the strength of his restraint. She understood all of it. Understanding did not stop the hurt. Dorian approved the order. The small digital chime sounded almost cheerful. Abby looked down before her face could betray her. That will be all, Miss Mercer, Greer said. Dorian's voice cut in, quiet and final. I will dismiss my own staff. The room froze at the word my. Abby lifted her eyes. Dorian walked past the council table and stopped beside her bucket. To anyone watching, he only handed her a folded linen cloth. Nothing royal, nothing dangerous. But inside the cloth, cold metal touched her palm. A key. His voice stayed formal. Finish your duties in the old East Corridor before you leave. Greer smiled like he had won. Abby closed her fingers around the key and understood that Dorian had just pointed her toward his mother's sealed rooms. Abby carried the key in her fist all the way down the east corridor, past portraits of dead Ashfords who looked like they had been disappointed since birth. The transfer order sat folded in her apron pocket, heavy as a stone. 30 miles down the mountain. Western Service Lodge. Quiet removal wrapped in polite language. She told herself Dorian had given her the key because he trusted her. Then she remembered his thumb pressing approval in front of the council, and trust started to feel a lot like being pushed off a cliff with good instructions. The old East Corridor had been sealed since Queen Helena died. No staff cleaned there. No guards lingered there. Even the cameras looked newer, installed after whatever everyone pretended had not happened. Abby found the last door behind a faded tapestry of a white wolf under a black moon. The key slid in without sound. That bothered her. Old locks should complain. Loyal locks should at least clear their throat. Inside, the room smelled like paper, lavender, and dust that had been left alone long enough to become history. Abby pulled out her phone and used the flashlight. A desk waited beneath the covered window. Shelves lined the walls, filled with cassette tapes, handwritten ledgers, old patrol maps, and framed photographs turned face down. In one picture, Queen Helena stood beside a younger Dorian, maybe 21, unsmiling in a formal coat, while Vesper sat on her shoulder like a feathered security guard. Abby touched the frame lightly. Vesper tapped at the window behind her. She almost screamed, which would have been embarrassing and possibly fatal to her dignity. The raven clung to the outside ledge, black eyes bright against the snow. Open up, Moonbond. I refuse to freeze for royal family trauma. Abby opened the window. Cold air rushed in. Vesper hopped onto the desk and shook snow from his wings onto a stack of very important-looking documents. Respect the dead, Abby whispered. I am respecting her. She hated that ledger. Vesper stabbed his beak toward a drawer with a brass handle. Abby opened it and found a false bottom. Beneath it lay a small tape recorder, a bundle of letters tied with black thread, and a notebook marked with the Queen's initials. The first page read, Malcolm Greer has access to patrol routes he should not know. The second listed dates, border crossings, missing supply trucks, and payments hidden through council charities. Abby's stomach tightened. This was not gossip. This was treason wearing a tie. Footsteps sounded in the hall. Abby shut off her phone. Dorian entered without knocking, because kings and disasters shared that habit. For a second, neither of them spoke. He looked at the transfer order sticking from her pocket, then at the open drawer. You found it. Abby gave a small laugh with no humor in it. That is usually what happens when someone hands me a key after publicly sending me away. His face tightened. I needed Greer to think you were out. You needed me hurt enough to look harmless. That landed. She saw it land. Dorian took one step forward, then stopped himself, as if the bond between them was a line he had no right to cross. Abigail, I am trying to keep you alive. I am trying to keep myself from becoming another quiet little mistake in this palace. Vesper, for once, said nothing. Abby picked up the tape recorder and pressed play. Queen Helena's voice filled the room, soft, strained, and terribly clear. If Malcolm controls my son's Maid, he controls the throne. Dorian went still. Abby looked down at the notebook in her hands. On the final page, in ink faded brown with age, the Queen had written one sentence. Trust the maid who hears the raven. The banquet began at 7 sharp, because Silverpine could forgive treason before it forgave a late dinner seating. Abby stood near the service doors in a clean black uniform, the transfer order still in her pocket, and Queen Helena's tape recorder hidden under folded napkins on the dessert cart. Across the grand hall, Dorian sat at the high table with the stillness of a man holding a storm behind his teeth. Lord Greer smiled beside him, relaxed as a preacher on Sunday morning. Lady Priscilla Wren sat 2 seats away, beautiful, quiet, and pale enough that Abby wondered if she was trapped too. Vesper perched above the carved arch, watching everyone with the disgust of a bird who had read the guest list and found it lacking. Greer has something in his sleeve, he said inside Abby's mind. Not a weapon. He lacks the courage. Worse, a charm. Abby's fingers tightened around a stack of plates. Where? She whispered. A junior maid beside her blinked. What? Nothing. Plates are slippery when they sense politics. The maid decided not to ask, which proved she had survival instincts. Greer rose before the second course. Before we honor the alliance, Your Majesty, the council must address a disturbance in the royal household. The room cooled. Dorian's eyes moved to Abby. Greer lifted one hand. From his sleeve, a thin flash of silver thread caught the chandelier light. Vesper screamed. Not in words. Not at first. His wings burst wide, and he dropped from the arch like a piece of night coming loose. Glasses tipped. A centerpiece crashed. Nobles jerked back from their chairs. Vesper flew in a wild circle over the hall, scattering black feathers and shrieking hard enough that every wolf in the room flinched. Abby heard the words underneath the noise, broken and panicked. Bound. Bound. Not my voice. Crown room. Silver under gold. Then the raven dove straight to Abby and landed on her shoulder. The hall went silent in the worst possible way. Greer did not even need to raise his voice. There. He sounded sad, which made Abby want to hit him with the breadbasket. The maid has influence over the crown raven. An elder stood. Is she commanding it? She is an unregistered Omega with unknown bloodline sensitivity, Greer said. She has had private access to the aviary, the late Queen's corridor, and His Majesty himself. The words spread through the room like smoke. Unknown. Private. Omega. Influence. Abby felt every stare land on her uniform, her hands, her throat. Dorian stood. The pressure of his alpha presence rolled through the hall, and several council members lowered their eyes before remembering they were supposed to be offended. Enough, he said. Greer turned to him gently. Your Majesty, if you defend her now, the pack will assume your judgment is compromised. Dorian's jaw clenched. The bond pulled between him and Abby, fierce and aching. This time she looked at him and shook her head once. Do not save me like that. He understood. It hurt him. Good. It hurt her too. Abby stepped forward with Vesper gripping her shoulder. Give me until moonrise, she said. Her voice did not shake, which felt like a miracle and possibly poor planning. If I cannot prove what happened to Vesper, I will leave Silverpine tonight. Greer's smile sharpened. Agreed. Vesper pressed his beak close to Abby's ear. The charm is in the crown room, little moonbond. Hurry. He plans to bury the truth before the moon clears the glass. The walk to the crown room was only 3 floors, 2 locked doors, and 1 lifetime of bad decisions. But Abby felt every step like a clock counting down to exile. Vesper clung to her shoulder, lighter than the trouble he carried, his claws careful through the fabric of her uniform. Behind them, the grand hall roared with controlled whispers. In a pack, whispers were never harmless. They were trial balloons. They were knives trying out softer names. Abby reached the marble stair before 2 council guards blocked her path. By order of Council Speaker Greer, you are to remain in the staff wing until moonrise. Abby looked at their badges, then at their faces. Young, nervous, too proud to know they were being used. That is impressive, she said. I did not know Lord Greer had become king in the last 4 minutes. One guard flushed. The other reached for his radio. Then the air changed. Dorian came down the corridor without running, because kings did not run unless the building was on fire, and even then they probably called it a strategic advance. His face was calm. His eyes were not. Beta Miles Calder followed him, broad-shouldered, grim, and carrying the black velvet case that held the royal command ring. Greer's guards stepped aside by instinct before remembering they had orders. Dorian stopped in front of them. Miss Mercer has until moonrise. Your Majesty, Council Speaker Greer said your judgment may be compromised. The words landed badly. Every wolf in the corridor felt it. Dorian looked at the guard for 1 long second. Then we will remove the argument. He opened the velvet case, took the command ring from his hand, and placed it in Miles Calder's palm. The silver band looked small there. It was not small. It held temporary authority over pack proceedings if an alpha king recused himself from a matter of personal bond. Abby knew the law. Everyone did. It was ancient, inconvenient, and rarely used because kings disliked proving they could be fair by giving up power. Miles went still. Dorian. Until moonrise, you preside, Dorian said. No council member can claim I shielded her. No one can say her evidence survived because of my command. Abby could not breathe for a moment. He was not rescuing her. He was making room for her to stand. There was a difference, and it hurt in a way kindness sometimes did when it arrived late. Dorian turned to her, his voice lower. I should have done this sooner. Abby wanted to forgive him. She also wanted to stay angry, because anger was easier to carry than hope. Then do not make it dramatic, she said. I have less than an hour. Vesper clicked his beak. Good. Romance postponed for evidence. Sensible woman. Miles led the guards away with one look. Dorian took Abby through the private stairwell to the crown room, a narrow chamber above the hall where the Ashford crown sat under glass and security lights blinked red every 5 seconds. Outside the tall window, the moon climbed over the ridge, pale and almost full. Vesper leapt from Abby's shoulder and slammed his beak against the glass case. Under gold, he rasped inside her mind. Silver thread. Old spell. Greer's leash. Abby knelt, ignoring the cold biting through her knees. Beneath the crown stand, hidden under a strip of velvet, was a thin silver thread tied around a black feather and a tiny bone charm carved with Greer's family mark. She pulled it free. The room went silent. Then Vesper screamed once, not in pain, but release. Images burst through Abby's mind. Queen Helena's corridor, Greer's voice, a sealed patrol map, a lie spoken over a funeral wreath. Abby grabbed the crown stand to steady herself. Dorian caught her elbow, then stopped, letting her choose whether to pull away. She did not. Vesper spread his wings, black against the moonlit glass. I remember, he said, and this time his voice was not only in Abby's head. It echoed through the crown room like judgment learning how to speak. By the time Abby walked back into the grand hall, every screen in Silverpine Palace had gone live. Not public internet live, thank God, because even werewolf monarchies had public relations teams with blood pressure, but internal pack live. Border stations, ridge houses, city patrol offices, and every council branch from Montana to northern Idaho could see the hall. Lord Greer stood beneath the moonlit glass ceiling like a man waiting to receive a victory he had already engraved. Miss Mercer, he said, gentle as poison in a paper cup. You had until moonrise. Abby stepped past the service doors with Vesper on her shoulder, Queen Helena's tape recorder in one hand, and the silver charm wrapped in a napkin in the other. Dorian came behind her, but not beside her. Not yet. He stayed 2 steps back, where everyone could see he was not leading her, not shielding her, not feeding her words. Beta Miles Calder stood at the council table with the royal command ring on his hand and the expression of a man who had just been handed a kingdom and immediately disliked the packaging. Proceed, Miles said. Greer smiled. This should be brief. Vesper opened his wings. It will not be brief. You have been lying for 10 years. Sit down. The hall broke. Not loudly. Just 100 small reactions at once. A gasp near the noble tables. A chair scraping. A guard whispering something into his radio, and then forgetting to finish. Greer's smile vanished so quickly Abby almost admired the efficiency. For the first time in a decade, everyone had heard the raven. Abby placed the silver charm on the council table. This was tied beneath the crown stand. It carried Lord Greer's family mark and a silence binding. Vesper was not unstable. He was being controlled. Greer recovered fast. Men like him always did. A maid's interpretation of old magic is hardly evidence. Abby set down the recorder. Then let the queen speak. The tape crackled. Queen Helena's voice filled the room. Tired, calm, unmistakably royal. She named patrol routes Greer had accessed. Payments routed through council charities. Border reports changed before they reached Dorian. No one moved. Even the wolves inside the alphas seemed to go quiet. Greer's face stayed composed until Vesper leaned forward and spoke in his exact voice, crisp and cold. The boy will be easier to guide without her. A sound moved through the hall, low and furious, but not wild. This was not a mob. This was a pack realizing it had been managed like a bank account. Dorian did not look away from Greer. His face had gone pale beneath the control. Abby felt the mate bond pull toward that grief, but she held her ground. This was not her moment to comfort him. This was the queen's moment to be believed. Greer stood. That bird is mimicking me. Lady Priscilla Wren rose before anyone expected her to. Her hands trembled once, then steadied. He is not the only one with proof. She looked at Dorian, then Abby. My family was pressured into the alliance. Lord Greer made it clear that if I refused, our winter patrol funding would disappear. Greer turned on her. Lady Wren. No, Priscilla said softly. I have been suitable long enough. Vesper clicked his beak. Finally, a spine in pearls. A few people almost laughed, which somehow made the truth hurt worse. Miles Calder removed Greer's council pin from the table seal with 2 fingers, as if it smelled bad. Lord Malcolm Greer, by authority of the temporary pack chair, you are suspended pending full tribunal review. Greer looked to Dorian then, searching for the boy he thought he had built out of grief and duty. He did not find him. Dorian stepped forward at last, voice quiet enough that the whole hall leaned in. My mother's name will be restored tonight. Miss Mercer's transfer is void, and no Omega and Silver Pine will ever again be removed because the council fears what she can hear. Vesper settled against Abby's shoulder, warm and smug. Good, he said. The throne has learned a sentence worth keeping. At sunrise, Silver Pine Palace looked less like a throne house and more like a place that had survived telling the truth. The banners still hung crooked from Vesper's dramatic contribution. Half the council table had been cleared for evidence. Lord Malcolm Greer was gone, escorted under pack authority to the Eastern Border Lodge, where his name, title, and access to every patrol route had been stripped before breakfast. It was not flashy justice. It was colder than that. It was the kind that locked every door a powerful man had once opened with a smile. Abby stood in the North Aviary with a cup of gas station coffee someone had smuggled up from the city, because royal kitchens were excellent at ceremony and terrible at caffeine. Vesper lay flat on Dorian's desk with one wing extended, pretending to be dead. He has not brought pumpkin bread, the raven announced. I am fading. Remember me as handsome. Abby looked at him. You knocked over 3 champagne towers and ruined a council speaker's career. And yet no bread. Behind her, the door opened. Dorian stepped in without the crown, without the command ring, and without the polished distance he used like armor. He carried a brown paper bakery bag in one hand. Vesper rose instantly, dignity restored by carbohydrates. Dorian set the bag on the desk, then looked at Abby with the careful quiet of a man approaching something more fragile than law. Greer's full tribunal begins tomorrow, he said. Queen Helena's record will be restored tonight. Every Omega staff reassignment from the last 10 years is being reviewed. Abby held the warm coffee between both hands. That is a lot to do before lunch. I have been told I need better habits. By who? A maid with poor respect for political timing. She should have smiled. Instead, the ache of the last few days rose up, honest and stubborn. You let them make me look disposable. Dorian did not defend himself. That mattered. An alpha king could command armies, silence rooms, bend old laws around his voice. But he could not make an apology worth anything by making it louder. I did, he said. I thought restraint was protection. It was fear wearing a better suit. Abby looked at him then. Really looked. The man was tired. Not weak. Tired in the way people got when they inherited a throne, a dead mother's silence, and a pack trained to call control the same thing as strength. I am not asking you to make me queen because a raven embarrassed you into feelings, she said. Vesper clicked his beak. Rude, but accurate. Dorian's mouth moved, almost a smile. Then what are you asking? Abby set her coffee down. A title with teeth. Royal Listener of the Crown Aviary. Protection for animal witnesses, old magic records, and any Omega with a gift the council would rather own than respect. No more quiet removals. No more pretending low rank means low value. Dorian bowed his head once, not as a lover making a promise, but as a king accepting responsibility. Granted, the mate bond warmed between them, not a chain, not a claim, but a door neither of them had to rush through. Abby felt it and did not step back. Dorian noticed and did not step closer. That was its own kind of respect. Below the tower, Silver Pine began to wake. Patrol trucks rolled out. Office lights blinked on across the mountain city. Somewhere, kitchen staff argued over who had predicted Abby would outlast the council. Loyalty, Abby thought, was not obedience. Power was not volume. Love was not possession. And an Omega's dignity was not something a king could give her. It was something he could finally stop standing in front of. Vesper dragged pumpkin bread from the bag and said, Excellent. The kingdom may recover. Abby laughed, and this time, when Dorian looked at her, he did not look away.